I've done a few videos about the changes that will happen with Wrath, and you guys seem to like them, and honestly there are still so many more noteworthy ones to go over that I thought I'd do another video on the topic. I went for a bit of a range of different subjects today, from ones you're pretty much going to know to some which might be a bit obscure, so hopefully you learn something new or at least remember something from the past. Let's make a start then. The first thing I want to talk about is that some damage over time effects and some heal over time effects finally get scaling. This has been a consistent problem through Classic and TBC. If your class relies on dots, they just don't scale well. In Wrath the Lich King, quite a bit changes with how stats interact with spells, so not only will your rotation get more advanced, but there are now more things to track during combat to make a difference. Certain classes will have dots that can crit now, such as Shadow Priest or Affliction Lock. Also, haste will have an effect on some dots as well, meaning you need to track your haste breakpoints on top of your hit cap. Haste breakpoints will essentially add another tick of a spell on its normal duration, so it's a real game changer. In Wrath the Lich King originally, this was a change added in patch 3.3 to help scaling of dot reliant classes. So whilst we have that going for us, unfortunately we don't have Pandemic. What is Pandemic, you may ask? Well, we kind of actually do. It is a thing in Wrath of the Lich King, it's a Warlock talent, but it was reworked in Mists of Pandaria to now do the following. When refreshing your periodic damage effects, duration remaining on the previous effect is added to the new one up to a maximum of 50% of the base duration. This effect would then be toned down and baked into all periodic effects later on. But for Wrath the Lich King at the moment, your dots are ticking faster, they can crit, but you need to make sure you aren't clipping them when you're refreshing. All in all, it should be a much more interesting playstyle. Remember in Classic and TBC when you get a new item and you want to use it, but it's not enchanted, so it's not an upgrade yet? You realise you forget the materials, you have to head over to the auction house, you have to buy the mats, find an enchanter, hope they don't have an accidental disconnect after you trade them the mats, and then work out how much you should tip them. Not a thing anymore in Wrath. As part of a new profession, Inscription, an item can be made called an Enchanting Vellum. Think of these as like blank sheets of paper that enchanters can store and enchant on, and then you can post them directly on the auction house, meaning both you can just go to the auction house now instead of finding somebody to enchant your new gear, or if you know you're next in line for an item, you just have the enchant in your bag ready to go to apply as soon as you get it. Speaking of enchanting, it also now provides a party-wide benefit when in a group, assuming this is in from launch, that is. Originally this wasn't included until patch 3.3, right at the end of the game. Perhaps it should be later because this change will affect the economy, but with an enchanter in the party, when an item drops, there will now be a choice to disenchant it instead of just need or greed, meaning whoever wins gets the mats that would have dropped directly into their inventory instead of it just being a vendor spec item. And with how popular dungeon farming has been for leveling so far in Classic and TBC, this is going to make a big difference to the amount of enchanting materials entering the market early on. Here's a little change people might like, and one I think you'll have probably heard of: Dual Spec. It feels like such a no-brainer to mention that I nearly forgot to include it. It was introduced in patch 3.1, which is Ulduar. This new feature allows players to have two separate talent layouts you can freely swap between. Well, I say freely because you have to be at least level 40, and it was a one-time cost of 1000 gold to unlock this feature. Do you usually DPS for raid but want to queue tank for dungeons because it's much faster to find a group? Frost Mage for PvP, Fire for PvE, and just so many more examples. And it makes more sense in Wrath the Lich King to have dual spec than it did in prior expansions as well. The new addition of glyphs to the game made changing spec whilst maintaining a class that actually plays the way you want it to another hurdle to get over. Some classes have a different glyph setup for PvP and PvE. Can you imagine having to carry around stacks of glyphs in your bags for when you want to do arena or raid? Perhaps that was the original intent from Blizzard with the new profession, because at the moment glyphs are sort of a one-time buy and that's it. Nevertheless, that's the way things are. Either way, since dual spec can be done at any class trainer in Wrath, I fully expect this feature to be made available during the pre-patch period so you can finally set up your class to do more than one thing. One thing that you will notice is the additions Wrath makes with changes which start to fill out areas where your class or spec may have been, well, lacking. Paladins and priests have practically no AoE damage, while they do now with Mindseer and Divine Storm. Only warrior tanks have personal cooldowns, bears get berserk and survival instincts, prop paladins get, well, essentially cheat death. on a tanking class. It's insane. Worrying about your mana bar as a DPS is a thing of the past, apart from Arcane Mage, because the whole gimmick of the spec is managing your mana. Unkins aren't going to be Unkins anymore, nor will LE Shamans have to worry about mana in longer fights. Perhaps they don't have to do that too much in TBC at the moment, but maybe that's just a fight length thing in general though. Tank threat has also been made much better through a number of changes. Every tank has strong single target and AoE capabilities, and as a DPS, pulling threat in Wrath becomes quite a bit more difficult actually. This happens as tanks now have many more cooldowns to go through and ways to create high threat at the start of a fight. Oh, and we have tricks of the trade, that's the thing. Misdirection gets lowered to a 30-second cooldown, on top of the majority of classes opening a fight with applying some kind of debuff or some buff to themselves. We've all had that start of a fight. The tank runs in and you hear them say, I'm getting a lot of parries and getting a lot of dodges, and you personally have a good opener and you have to hold back, and it's just not very fun. This should happen a lot less. Another small change in raids has been made to potions. Now, when I first played Classic again, and this also goes for TBC, I totally forgot that potions are just on a flat 2-minute cooldown, use them whenever you want. This is updated in Wrath so that potion cooldowns will only begin after combat ends. This will be the turning point where people start to talk about pre-potting. This is using a potion just a second or so before the boss fight starts, so you're benefiting from the potion as soon as you're entering combat, but you've also begun its cooldown because you weren't in combat when you used it, meaning 2 minutes later you get another potion. I can tell you right now that once we're in Wrath and you start to get to that boss you have problems with, which there will be for the majority of the players, the GM will be looking through your logs, seeing only one potion and calling you out if you aren't pre-potting, I can guarantee it. Finally, do you remember the Burning Crusade launch when they added the Neverstalker mount? And a lot of people weren't very happy to see that. I wonder what kind of animal from Northrend they're going to include to sell with the boost this time around. You've got to pick something that fits with both Classic and Retail, of course. But it was in Wrath that the first ever store mount was added to the game. Well, I guess there was already the TCG mounts, the recruiter friend things, but this was the first one to be straight from the source. And it releases right around the end of Wrath the Lich King, the Celestial Steed. And boy oh boy, back in 2010, you better believe people were mad about this, just as they are to this day when store mounts are announced. For only $25 you can get your special sparkle pony to ride or fly your way around Northrend. Now honestly, I don't see them trying to charge you for the same mount again. Surely not, right? I do think, however, there is a chance that they just straight up give people the mount in Classic who own it in Retail. Kinda makes sense, right? You paid for it once, it's Wrath of the Lich King again, here's your mount back. You never know, they've surprised us before with things like this. And that is about everything that I wanted to cover today, so hopefully you found out about something that's new. Again, there are so many changes that happen moving from TBC to Wrath, way more than we've seen with either version of the game previously. Let me know if you've got any others that stand out to you, and maybe I can do another one of these in the future if people like it. As always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you all in the next one very soon.